What does it mean to get out of your own way? Like, what does that phrase mean to you?
Understanding what got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. For me, it was like understanding that I need to let go of control, like understanding what I can control or what I can't. There'd be so many times I would just be like festering about a decision that was made that actually didn't matter, right? And so getting out of your own way is just like understanding who you are and what's going to get you to the next level, and being okay with letting go of the processes, the people, the habits, the stuff. That's kind of hard, but like once you're able to do that, then I think you're going to open up to some curiosity that'll let you really level up and progress in a really cool way.
Man, it has been a long time since I got to sit down with you. This time we're virtual and we get to record it so other people can hear our crazy dialogue.
I'm so excited.
It's going to be great. I just have to ask this because you were one of the first people I sat down with when I moved to the area.
I do remember this, yes.
And I had done a little bit of research at the time to like find good people to connect with. You've been a phenomenal person to connect with for a variety of reasons. But I recently found out that you studied creative writing.
Yes.
Yes. Have a career that's so different than that.
Yeah, I studied creative writing in college. I, started college thinking I wanted to do like something in like economics, and like very clearly that was like not for me. But I took a creative writing class on a whim and I loved it, man. And so I think like I'm a big proponent of the liberal arts. And so I think that, anyone who studies anything English, so creative writing, philosophy, humanities, like you can pretty much write your ticket anywhere because you learn how to think. I think I learned how to think being a writer. And so any space that I'm in, I'm like, I can figure this out, or at least know the right questions to figure it out. So yeah, I still get to write quite a bit in my job. I oversee, marketing communications, investor relations, which is mostly just a lot of writing. So I still like to think that I didn't do a direct career in writing, but it still has served me well.
Well, it has such a big implication now. It's ultimately communication.
Exactly.
So you learned a very important skill. I also just saw you got MacMan of the Year.
Yes. So, yes, that did happen. So MAC, which is the Men's Arts Council, is kind of the men's auxiliary fundraising arm for the Phoenix Art Museum. It's been around for quite some time. And so it's a group of guys that kind of get together and pull their resources, time, talent, and just ideas and interest around how do we make the museum better and how do we support it. My background has not typically been in arts and culture, but there's something about the group. I joined about 5 or 6 years ago that really drew me in. So I've gotten to spend a lot of time at the Phoenix Art Museum. And this past year, I've put in a lot of work with the organization, and they voted me Mac of the Year, which I was not expecting at all. But it was I'm honored for that recognition.
It's probably very fitting because I know you to be a rather humble individual. I saw the article, and it was fitting that we get to have this conversation today. I would love to talk to some of those on the board, because the intersection of art and business really fascinates me.
Yes.
So if ever that conversation happens on your side,
we'll make it happen.
To connect them.
We'll make it happen.
So I was thinking about where you could lend a real heart to the matter of not just the idea of getting out of your own way, but also this space of business and people. Let's just start with the world you're in with EvolvedMD. It has a very unique lens in the workplace. Can you tell us about that? And then I'll edge some questions your way.
Yeah. So EvolvedMD, I've been part of the team, privileged to be part of the team for the last, I believe, a little over 4 years. And so the company itself was started in 2017. And the idea is that we integrate behavioral health into primary care. So we put a therapist right where you see your doctor, your pediatrician, your gynecologist, who might it be, and they literally collaborate on your care. So this integrated care model really has proven to be the only kind of thing at scale that you can do to increase access to mental health, reduce stigma. And so we get to work with a team of some amazing therapists. We're a little over 100 therapists in the company right now and close to 200 employees. But it's been great to see. And this, again, I didn't come from this world. I was just kind of thrown into healthcare, but it makes me very happy that our folks are out there helping folks in the markets that we're in. And as a kind of, I would say, externality of that, or because of that, not sure which one, we've been really, really thoughtful about how we build the culture here at EvolvedMD. So we have a lot of things around, not just work-life balance, because I think everyone has kind of done that, but like, how do you actually show up for your people? How do you talk about mental health in the workplace? I've kind of roadshowed this presentation called the Business Case for Mental Health for the last 2 or 3 years, and working with and getting in front of high level executives on like why it's so important that you're having these conversations, because burnout's real. You're losing a lot of people to other firms that are doing this right. So we've taken a really thoughtful approach to mental health in the workplace and making sure that our people are well taken care of, and that the people who lead them are also thinking about their care in a really innovative way.
Here's my angle on this. In entrepreneur land or business owner land, or in this personal development zone where a lot of people are high charging, they're ambitious, and they're going, there is a conversation that's happening about mental health, but it is very limited to the individual that's listening, right? It's like, are you okay, sir entrepreneur or madam entrepreneur? It very seldom is your team okay? Is everyone in the boat okay? Are you thinking about others? And there is a lane of mental health that we have to prioritize as individuals and know thyself. That's important. But there's a whole other level of awareness and an entirely different operating system when you start to care about the mental health of your employees the same way you would prioritize your own. If that's a part of your culture, I would love to hear how that happened, or how that's been made like homogenous. But also, I just love to hear your take on that. Like, why is it harder for us to expand our awareness?
Yeah, I think I'll answer your first question. We've been really intentional about how we bring on people. So we kind of have think of a set of values of, we make sure that the folks that we onboard to be people leaders actually care about their people. I always talk about the best way businesses can get a good ROI on new hires is just hire people that give a damn, right? Like, the best thing that your manager can do is just really actually care about you. And accountability has to be there, of course. High expectations can be there, but none of those are mutually exclusive. Like, you can run a really high performing team while also understanding that like life happens. And sometimes you have to address the life before they're ever going to be able to do these things. And so we just curated a really good group of folks that believe that mantra. And we've also been really, I've been proud about, we've gotten rid of those who have not lived that mantra. And that's been refreshing to see, of like, even if you're a quote unquote A player, if you're an a-hole to your team, like, that's a non-negotiable. You won't be here. And that's been really important for us to live by. I think it's also hard because people just don't know how to have these conversations, probably with themselves, but let alone another team member who's going through it. Or like, how do you even approach or address, hey, it seems like your performance is off, but is that because of the workload, or is there something else happening? And there's some really good tools that we've brought in. When I came on, I made sure that in each of our folks one-on-ones, right? So everyone throughout the company, no matter who you are, at the top of your one-on-one is, how are you doing personally? How are you doing professionally? Scale of 1 to 10. And in those conversations, if someone's a 3 or 4 personally, we spend the one-on-one talking about that. And it ranges from anything from, my wife and I are trying to sell our house. We just can't do it. We need to be out of here by a certain time. And so I'm stressed about, like, is the timeline going to meet? It's like, dude, that would be very stressful. No wonder your head's not here. Let's talk about that and what we can do and all those things. And so again, it's just people giving a damn. But it's something that we're never taught in the work world, right? Like, we weren't brought up this way to do this. And so it's kind of very new and innovative and bold, but it needs to happen. And more, especially as the younger generations come into the workplace, they're demanding it. And it's just the right thing to do.
It is. Yeah, I agree with that. And it does seem that they can smell it when an organization cares.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. When a manager cares. Is that a trainable skill? Like, if someone is a great entrepreneur, a great business person, but maybe hasn't quite yet gotten to the place where they can elicit that kind of care, is that trainable?
I don't think it's trainable unless you've gone on your own mental health journey, or you're open to your own mental health journey. I think it's really hard to be as empathetic and vulnerable and thoughtful as that requires if you haven't done the work yourself. So I think it's a yes and. I'm sure it is trainable if that person has those baseline kind of skills in themselves.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and the point got brought up that when you weather hard storms, you kind of expand your range and radius of emotions, and it makes it a lot easier to guide someone that's inside of that range. But if a leader is experiencing an individual on their team whose range of emotions is beyond their range, then it gets really
It's
dicey.
very difficult. And that's a great way of putting it. Like if you haven't experienced or like not put in the work to try to experience it, it's going to be next to impossible for you to work with someone who's going through it because you just have no context or understanding on how to even begin.
Right. Like what comes to mind is hearing a person say with zero actuality, "Oh, that sounds tough." Right? And just like, "Thanks, man. That's not helpful."
That's great.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So I find mental health is it's a big topic and can kind of be a bit buzzy, where organizations are starting to talk about it, and it makes its way into the terrain of marketing and hiring and recruiting. But behind the scenes, aside from this like care that we're talking about, my observation is that mental health is also about creating the space for someone to be somewhat autonomous, to have the support. But that really requires a culture of someone being able to raise their hand and say, like, "Hey, I want help." And in entrepreneur land, in business owner land, it is just so difficult for someone to actually admit that they need help or want help. And that goes way beyond just mental health. In order to create a space though, where people can raise their hand and it's not judged or it's not criticized, and it doesn't end up in that trailing conversation of like, "Well, we're worried about performance now." How do you foster that?
There's we had a kind of an admin team gathering last Friday. So all kind of the executive support staff, everyone who's not clinical essentially. And I had everyone kind of go through these two readings. And one was from Adam Grant, and he talks about like mentally strong and successful people do these four things. And one of the four things was they have a mistake bank. It's essentially, they allow themselves as many mistakes, however X number of mistakes every day, week, month. And like reading that, it's something that we've done, but I've never seen it in that way, which we want to institutionalize more, which is understanding first and foremost, you're gonna mess up. And like once you get that in your mind, that makes it really easy to raise your hand and say, like, I need help on things. I think also just having a culture of saying, like, we understand that you only have 8 hours in a day or working hours in a day. So if your bandwidth, and I always tell my teams this, like if your bandwidth is at the max, I can't manage what I don't know. So just tell me. If it's like, hey, I can't get to that week because of, it's like, okay, there's nothing here that we can't move or delay. And if there is something, we'll prioritize that. But there's no need for anyone to be stressed out about these things. And I think it's hard for especially A players and hard chargers to kind of take a step back and say, like, I can't do all of this. I think it's hard for many people to admit. I think that was one of the best things for me to understand in the last 4 or 5 years through some coaching is like, I can't do everything, nor should I. And I'm just going to put myself in the ground if I try to. So don't even attempt it. And I think those are just things, again, I think the leader has to be there themselves before they can ever coach or do that with their teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to get to a breaking point before that happens, typically, when you're the hard charger. Yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. You know, the some of my experiences have taught me power my way through it, but the cost is my own wellness, and then it sort of lags to everyone else. What do you think about this though? One of the things that I really appreciate about a team dynamic versus a typical hierarchical, I don't even know how to say that word, hierarchical structure, is both players being able to ask for help, manager included. And that kind of creates a natural vulnerability for the owner, the operator, the manager, the leader to say, hey, things aren't well or things aren't great. And in the short run, that might have its own calamity. In the long run, though, it has always played out well for me.
Yeah.
Have you noticed similar things?
Yeah, I think I think having a manager being vulnerable or just being honest and being, I also ask my team all the time, it's like, hey, this day has gotten away from me. I need someone to take this on, and whoever raises their hand, right? And vice versa. Someone can be like, hey, I've just had a staffer that's like, I'm going to be gone for these X number of days. And someone else like, I'll take that over for you. So it's kind of a give, take, push, pull, but mostly to your point of like, it's a team coming together around those things. And that can only, as you say, strengthen that relationship. I think that the caveat to that would be is like the number one thing that someone wants in their manager outside of just, a safe space for vulnerability is also just general competence. And so I would imagine that if your team is seeing you say, like, I don't have the bandwidth all the time, they're going to kind of question you as a leader. So I would be kind of cautious of that. Not saying that you shouldn't, you should definitely do it, but like be thoughtful about how you're presenting yourself and those things to your team, just from a way of like, you want to make sure that they have confidence in you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good piece of wisdom. You know, I get to work with leaders all the time, and I'd say that most of the people that tune into our podcast probably are the leaders that just struggle their way through it and may not know the cost of that.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, I had to take a client and meet with him in person, and we just talked. We didn't do what we'd initially planned to do because it was such an aggressively long period of burnout and fatigue, and the selfishness that I think that actually presents is, one, you kind of burn the team because they get to see you become the juggernaut and just start bulldozing walls and not take care of yourself. Not a great example. But also, when you operate like that, your bandwidth just keeps going down. So you actually keep handling less and less and less, meaning they got to pick up more and more and more. It's just been interesting to watch that from the outside, even though I'm not necessarily in the mental health space. It just is a big part of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I wish more and more entrepreneurs and leaders would realize that like there's like power in saying no. And there's power in understanding like what you can't control. And so once you let go of some of those things, you're better off for it. Like you can't, and I do understand there's seasons in life and times in life where if you're building a business, right, like it's just gonna be, part of my language, shitty for a bit. Like it's just gonna be, and like that's fine, but it can't be like that for 5 years. Like you can do anything for a year, like you can push and you can sprint, but like you can't do that. That's not a long-term strategy. It's not sustainable. And I think that's where I've seen entrepreneurs get in trouble. It's like, hey, you've been running for a while. This isn't going to work. So there has to be a support structure around you, or you just got to say no to more. And I know that's hard for people, but it's the only way. And there's this article that came out at the end of last year that talked about more and more CEOs are quitting because the job is just so hard. And a lot of CEOs last year actually died on the job. Like they got so stressed that it caused health issues. And we should never let it get that far. Like it should never get that far. And there's all these warning signs that people just ignore or rather choose to ignore. And it should never be that way.
That's insane.
Yeah. Like your job like should never like
significant number.
Yeah.
Of CEOs.
Yep.
What the shit, man? There was a version of me that I think believed you sacrifice everything, you do what it takes. And I think a new version of me would be like, nope,
I'm not doing that. And I don't think that it has to be the extremes, right? So I do think there's something to be said about resilience and grit and pushing through in times that you kind of have to. And I think when you're first starting a company or first starting the things, you do, but that shouldn't be the norm, right? Like that should be a data point, an outlier of like this time in my life, I had to do this, but that was only at this time in my life. It's the ones where that's been their ethos for 10, 15 years. It's like, bud, this is not a healthy place for you. And even though I know some people are like, well, I just love the work and I love to do it, but it's like, well, you can't do that and sacrifice of like your family or your friends or like your physical health. Like you may love it, but you also may have to love it a little less to take care of you and the other part of your life too.
Yeah. Well, saying no becomes challenging and in a way is the answer. But I think letting go also presents every entrepreneur, every business owner, every leader. It doesn't even matter if you own a business.
Right.
If you're in a position of leadership, no is the liberating factor. You think I'm going to say yes enough times that I get out of this, but every time you say yes, you almost dig the hole deeper.
I think it takes everyone's own journey to set those boundaries with people, or just be like, yeah, no, I don't like, thanks for the opportunity, but I'm not going to take that. Or God, I used to be out at like every event. I did so much in the community, which I loved. And at that point in my life, that was the right thing to do, right? But now I'm just so thoughtful of like, thanks for the invite, but like I'm going to spend Friday night with my family, or I'm just going to, chill at home or be with friends, or I'd love to, join that board of committee, but I just don't think I'm going to give the time to that. I don't really want to. And like 10 years ago, I would have never thought to do that. Now I'm like very comfortable with it. It's like, appreciate what you want to do. keep me in mind for something in the future. This is not for me right now. That's it.
That sounds to me like getting out of your own way.
Yeah.
What was there a point where it just got overwhelming and it created a new discovery and saying no?
I think, actually, I think it's just kind of the natural cliche. As you get older, your priorities are different, like just different. I am very much very ambitious and career aligned, but that's like not, I wouldn't say like that's my number one. It's more so like, how do I build out, the personal life, relationship, friends, family, and those things, and want to give more time there. I think that was it. I don't think there was one event. I think it's mostly like the nature of the work that I was doing changed. So previously I was very much in very, very external facing roles where my job was to kind of engage, facilitate, be in front of these groups of people or just individuals. And so I was just always hard charging kind of everywhere. Especially in my last job, I was all about like being around Phoenix, and I did a lot of work in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and Dallas. So I was just kind of always in it. And then once my job changed to being more kind of internal facing as, chief of staff here and doing a little bit on the external relations work. Certainly I do all of our media and PR, but the job just changed. And so I was like, I don't actually have to do all those things I was doing before. And I also just want to set a boundary because I've discovered that I just need more time with me. There are times where I'm just like, I'm not going to, I go to movies alone a lot. That's like my place to recharge.
I love it alone.
I love an alone movie because it's like, I just leave my phone in the car. I watch literally whatever's on screen, and I have that. So I think it's just kind of changing priorities as I got older. That's what kind of made the switch.
So let's discount the older piece. We're just going to pretend like it's a whole different subset of this question. In a way, I have also slowed down. And in slowing down, I've sped up. So to me, the language we use around slowing down is incredibly negative, always, right? Getting older, we slow down. Oh, the business is more successful, so I'm slowing down. And in a way, at least the way I perceive it, I used to fire like as if I was an archer. I'd fire 37 arrows a day. And I was just constantly meeting the meeting. I'm like trying to hit the target. Some of that frantic, some of that luck, some of that just pure optimism and ego. Then as I've gotten better at my craft and better at what I do and better at saying no, now I can just fire like 4 arrows a day and have the same efficiency,
same impact
that I used to have with 37.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that part of your recipe too? Like, can I get really, really, really good so that I'm as effective? I just don't work as hard.
I think there's definitely something to be said about that. I think the energy that I put behind things, 5 or 6 years ago is definitely different from the energy I do now. And it's like, how do you work through and influence people? How do you change how you communicate to be more impactful and concise? And just like, yeah, I think I can do more in a given day now than I ever could before, just because I've kind of recalibrated how those things go. And I do think the quote unquote slowing down, I think for me in my future, I was having this conversation this morning. I've certainly talked about it with my executive coach. I think after this job, I don't know if I'll do another 9 to 5. Like, I think consulting sounds good or coaching, but I definitely don't want to like be in it as much. And I would never have thought that when I was like 25. It's like, of course you're going to do this. And now I'm like, I love this work. I love the work that I do now. And I love this team. But I think after we're kind of done with this, I'll probably just kind of chill for a bit, which I never thought I would say. And I'm super excited about that. And I would actually push back and say, I don't think slowing down is a bad thing. I think it's like, it's proof that like you've gotten what you've needed so far. And so you can take a step back to reassess what you want to do even more in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that's where mastery is, right? Like the master doesn't need to do it in 12 hours. He does it in 12 minutes. Yep. Yeah. Well, I love that.
That's really good.
I think you'd be a great consultant, coach, leader. I know you'll be great at that. You mentioned something that I'd like to pull on a little bit. You mentioned having influence. About 2 weekends ago, we put on a workshop in tandem with a community called Good Abundance Emerge on the idea of influence. And it actually stirred up a lot of interesting polarity. Some people were on the side of like, influence is great, and I can't wait to help make a positive influence and create and build and grow. And others were on the fence of like, this is gross and this is just a way that people get what they want and achieve their goals at the expense of others. And it was a really fascinating dialogue because like I almost don't even see that second half just because of my world and where I'm at. But I can see how there's this idea of influence is largely about who is in the position to create an influence and their world. When you think of leadership and mental health and culture, influence is a huge part of that. Like it's got to be. You've also grown to a place where you can have an influence. Is that something you pay hyper close attention to? Is it natural now? Was it awkward at first? Like what? How did you build in your influence?
That's a good question. I did. There was a Black storytellers kind of series called The Whole Story. That was around probably around like 2017, and I did one of the cohorts. And so a Black storyteller goes on stage and talks for 10 minutes about whatever they want to talk about. And I talked about always being always having influence in like predominantly white spaces. And so I talk a lot about like this is always just something that's kind of been natural to me, like even within my own family, like getting folks to do the things that I want and need them to do. And so this is just kind of something I've kind of grown up with, but it was kind of when I started my career and understanding that like that influence can be used definitely for your, as someone would say, like your own selfish reasons, but it's so much more powerful and exciting when you can use your influence for something good, like getting someone to donate dollars to a charity or getting them to, be involved in something they normally wouldn't is like how I like to spend my influence. I don't think I can see the negative side and I totally understand where that person was coming from, but I see more of the beauty of like being able to work through people to make the world a better place. Like that's how I view influence. And I've loved, being able to have the kind of the social stature that I do, especially in Phoenix where I grew up, and I have a big community here. And so I have a lot of folks that I can work with and through to kind of get things done and some good things done.
So this idea of you being a Black person in white spaces created an opportunity, but you had to have the integrity to say, well, this is how I want to create change. Was it always intentional, or have you gotten more and more intentional over the years?
That's a great question. I've gotten more intentional over the years. I would say like better understanding like my values and what's important to me over the last, say, even 5 years has really helped influence where my focus is and like how I want to spend my time, what I want to give my time to, and how do I want to connect the people in my life of means and also influence of their own to the causes and things that I love and adore. And so that's kind of a recent within 5-year development. I would say before it was just kind of like I'm doing this thing, but now it's much more strategic and much more thoughtful.
Yeah, I can see that in you. The conversations you and I have had have their own maybe smell of influence. You've been an influence in my feeling comfortable here in Arizona, feeling connected. You made a couple of really cool introductions, and one of the things that I can appreciate about the way that at least I've seen you operate is that you have a knack for telling a story, which goes back to your creative writing, no doubt, and also making an invitation to somebody rather than a suggestion. And that's a very subtle difference, but you do a really good job of that. I don't know if that's in awareness or not, but it is remarkable. And I'm curious if, as you've done that, it has created that culture around you with family and friends where they start to ask you questions about your growth, about your expansion in business, about your success. Like, have people around you asked you how you did it?
Not in like a direct way, but conversations are like how did you get here, or what are some of the things that like you would say is kind of the nuggets for that? I mean, that's kind of why I started my column a couple of years ago, like Sentari on leadership, because it's just like a lot in my head that I want to put out there, especially for emerging leaders and like young executives of like, these are the things that like kind of helped me or the things that I've learned. But mostly like my conversations are around, better helping people better understand like what are they actually passionate about and like what do they want to do. And even if that means that like they have to make a kind of drastic shift in their lives, like the thing that makes me happy is like bringing the best out of people and helping them understand like, hey, it seems like you're actually like not aligned on the things that you want. And I can see that. And that might be in professional life, might be in personal life. I've had friends where we've had conversations. It's like, seems like you don't want to be married. And so the choices that you're making make it seem like you should be having a very, direct conversation with your significant other right now. And like, those are the conversations that are hard, but I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to have them because I just genuinely want the best for people. And so that's where most of those conversations happen.
Are those hard conversations?
I don't think those are hard conversations for me. I think it's depending on the journey of the other person it is, but I've also think like to the start of this conversation, I've had really, I'm really, really thankful for my mental health journey and the guidance, the counseling and the coaching I've gotten over the years with my therapist and my coach. And so these conversations I think are just ways to impart the wisdom and, things that I've been able to get and giving to someone else of like, hey, this is what I've learned in my time. I'm giving it to you. You do with that what you will, but I think you'll be a better person if you do. And you'll be much happier. And so, not hard for me, might be hard for them, but it seems like, I would say 8 times out of 10, they take that advice for the better and it's worked out for them.
Yeah. But you do a great job of making it an invitation, not a suggestion. It's quite a craft. When I hear someone that can speak to someone about a hard, observation or a hard pivot, or maybe it's not even hard, but it's obvious from the outside that may not be obvious on the inside. It says to me that they have a full tank, and to pay that much attention to someone else, we've got to kind of have a full cup to be able to pour in. How do you keep your tank full?
Oh, how do I do it? That's a good question. I think it changes from day to day. I think I'm very privileged and lucky to have a career that I actually truly love. Like we're making an impact and we're doing great things, and I get to work with some awesome people, and it's challenging, and I get to do something different each and every day. So like professionally, my cup is full, and I've always been the biggest champion for work-life integration. I actually don't think work-life balance is a thing. So, I've always kind of lived my professional life in a way that I kind of go in and out of personal and professional. And I think that helps me in such a profound way. I know some people love like, they're there from 8 to 5, their laptop's off, they don't talk, and then, or whatever it might look like. I wake up, I work out, I do some work, I take a walk, I go to a meeting that has nothing to do with work, or I go to a lunch with a friend that has nothing to do with work. I go with the dog, I come back, I write. And so my days are pretty much like, my days are set up to make me the happiest would be the easiest way. So my cup is always full because I get to fill my days with those things. I love a good movie. My favorite thing to do is like what we did yesterday, which was just sit on the couch and watch a bunch of movies. Like I can watch movies back to back to back. And so that's good. I get to do some pretty cool things, man. And I'm very fortunate in that. And I'm also fortunate that I'm to this place in my life where, as we were talking about before, I get to set my own boundaries. And so I don't do anything that sucks my energy. I don't allow time for it. I don't allow time for people that suck my energy. So I'm just blessed to be around the people that bring me joy, and I get to do stuff that brings me joy.
Sounds like you.
Yes.
That's half the battle. How does someone go about building work-life integration?
That's a great question. I think it's one, understanding like what that looks like to you. Cause I think for me, it's just like something that I've always, I've never had a job where I've had to like be there 8 to 5. Like I've just never had that. So I would give the biggest caveat and asterisk, which is like some jobs that they just don't allow it. So I totally get that. But even if it's something around like how you start your day and how you end your day, and then just giving yourself time during the workday to do something that you really like even if it is taking an extended lunch and going to read, like I like to just sit sometimes and read or write. But I do think it's probably just dependent on the role and the position. But for me, I've always negotiated coming in. It's like, look, I'm going to be your best performer. Like, do not worry about my work product. But that also means like, if I want to go do something with a men's art council for 3 hours on a Friday, I'm going to go do that. And it's like, okay, good. And so those are the things that have always been like my non-negotiables. And I'd say the other piece would be like, those might be some things you can negotiate on the front end with a job on like salary and things. It's like, hey, I'm willing to not make this much if it means that like on a Thursday, if I want to go volunteer for, some charity or do something, that I'm going to do that. And that's not a problem. So those are the things you have to kind of see where your values and priorities lie for you.
This brings up something interesting for me in my journey of entrepreneurship. So when I was an employee, my performance was high enough and regarded enough that I felt like I could set some of those lines. Then as an entrepreneur, even though my performance is probably higher, I'm the one that's at the helm. So I don't give myself the same space as if I'm asserting a boundary to someone else, because I have to hold my own boundary with myself. It becomes a really interesting game of like, if I do want to take off on a Thursday and go volunteer, the mathematics that are going on in my head is insane, right? Like what's a priority? What needs to happen? And I get this is good for me. It'll make me feel better. And I know it's good for them, but like, what about the business? Is everything going to be okay? Like, I'm just playing this weird calculus. What advice would you give to someone that is in a leadership position and they are responsible for a lot and they might need things to happen, but they don't know how to give themselves space to do something that they really enjoy? They're not giving themselves permission. They're not allowing themselves to have the space to do something they love, which ultimately will make them better at what they're doing, but they're struggling with the permission to take it.
I think, and you live this world, having an accountability partner for that is probably really, really important. Or if you have a coach or a mentor or a group of people in a forum of like, hey, my priority is like, I got the work thing down. I need help on someone being like, hey, Aaron, did you take an hour today to go read or volunteer? And like having someone in your life that like checks you on that. Because we have plenty of people to check us on like the work performance like that. You're always going to be great on that. It's those reminders on the other piece. And I think it actually helps to have someone come from a peer. So another entrepreneur or leader. So you don't like, when it comes from your family, you're like, well, of course you want me to do that but if it's another like high level business person saying like, hey, I took half a Friday off to go be with my kids, you should too, man. Like that's where you need, like, you're the sum of the people around you. So more, I guess my advice would be have an accountability partner and also surround yourself with people who are aligned in the values too. Because if you're around just a bunch of people that believe that like a 15-hour workday is the right thing to do, then like they're never going to hold you accountable for that. But you just have to decide if that's your priority or not.
Man, that's good. Yeah, I hear him at the back of my head, like a mom or brother being like, you got to get to the gym. And it definitely is different when it comes from somebody else. I also think that play has been a big part of my recipe lately for actually a better performance at work. And similarly, I have to give myself permission to play and to have a little bit of fun. My like spider senses tingle when I hear people talk about the workplace being so serious and heavy and structured. They're like, no, like we get things done. Like it's a high performance environment. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. That could mean a lot of things.
What does that even mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody knows. Yeah. I think sometimes this idea of like you're on all the time is so loud and pervasive. It's like hustle culture that it can really damage the longevity of wanting to work in a business, wanting to work for a team. And you're essentially responsible. If you're the chief of staff, you're responsible for like everybody in a way. How do you make sure everyone's enjoying the process?
Yeah. And that's a great question. It's something that I have to kind of deal with all the time because the majority of our staff actually sit in spaces. So literally sit in clinics that are not connected to our corporate HQ. So there's so many people that our teams just don't have touch points with. And so it's like, how do you influence and work through their managers and other people leaders to make sure that they're having a great experience? It's hard. It's really hard. And it's also, again, going back to like, you have to make sure that the people that are managing people are values aligned, because if they're not, then they're honestly not going to get that experience. So I think it's something that we are going to work. It's top of mind for me and the rest of the executive team. That is, how do you instill and keep this culture when it's kind of dissipated across different regions? So let's talk again in a year to see if we're doing it well. But I do, one of the things you talked about, which is kind of the whole hustle culture, I go back and forth on this, and I actually think that like there's a time in your life for that. Actually, I think we've actually done a disservice on the opposite end of like saying like it has to be work-life balance, it has to be these things. And so you have people who feel kind of quelled if they're a gunner, right? Like if you're 25 or 26 and you're like shooting for like this part in your career and you just got to get after it, I actually think that's totally fine. Like that's the time of your life to do it. You can set the boundary. Like you can just run harder and faster. You probably don't have the same responsibilities as, and probably most of your friends are doing it too. I think that's okay. Like I think we've done a disservice by saying like hustle culture is terrible. It is if it leads to like burnout and like horrible habits, but like you can do that and also be fine. So I hate when people are like hustle culture is dead, or like that's not the way it should be, or it's like, or I'm only going to demand a job that that like I don't have to work on the after 5 p.m. and do all these things, which is like, that's totally fine. We have that culture here, but it's also probably going to limit you and like, because you could do so much more if you're kind of quote unquote hustling, or you can get there faster if you hustle. And I think that's something important to call out. So it's like, figure out where you want to align your values and priorities as a professional. I think if you want to be that person, that's totally fine too. Like it's totally fine. You know what your goals are more than I do. I'm just saying for me, that's not a priority. And I know that for a lot of the folks at our office, like that's not what their number one thing is. They want this balance. But it's okay to like not. I think there've been so many articles that have come up lately where just, they lambast people who want to be hard charged in their work. And it's like, some people just kind of like doing that, and that's fine.
Yeah. It almost contradicts the point of hustle culture was not like you work all the time. The point was, if you have big aspirations, go
do it
and let nothing stop you. Like, come on, let's go. I don't know where that turned. It seems like at some point it became like, sacrifice your left arm for this. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no one wants to do that. No.
Yeah, I don't know. I got caught up. I think it was probably it was actually the pandemic that really pivoted a lot for me, because I was a purebred extrovert, and that was like, you're at your house by yourself all the time. Wipe down your mail. Yeah. Like, it's like it was wild. I'm like taking Lysol wipes to my envelope, like, and something about that really had a negative effect on me, because I couldn't go out and recharge through the conversations that I really loved. And then it forced me to look at, okay, well, if I have to recalibrate and I have to redesign things, what do I want? And that goes back to a question we were asking earlier. Like, do you know what you want?
Do you know what your values are? Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like existential questions. Who am I and what do I want? To me, they're like really important questions. But the hustle culture I got really trapped in COVID, because I was trying to perform the same way I did by myself all the time. And then it was like, oh man,
that's not sustainable.
I'm burning out.
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
Ugh. Man, that was a hard season. Ooh. You ever been through burnout?
I don't think I've talked a lot about this. I don't think I've experienced burnout in a way that it was like, a physical and mental shutdown. I've experienced burnout and that I become like disengaged around the work or the project or the people. Yeah, that's certainly happened. And I now know that like there are like little warning signs and things. It's like, oh, am I not liking that? Or is it taking me longer to do because I just don't want to do it? Am I becoming actively disengaged? And it's like, okay, then why is that happening? And then have to have conversations with myself or whatever I'm doing of like, is this still working? So never like, there's not been like a breakdown moment, but there's certainly been places or times where I'm like, I just don't feel like doing this anymore. And that's definitely like a sign of burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good that you know the warning signs too. One of the things that I know you and I have talked about too is, as you're building something, especially because you're coming from startup mode, you have to go out, you got to raise capital, you got to meet investors, you're trying to make all these numbers come together. You almost have like two factions of the business. You have like leadership. I'll put that in bunny ears. You have like leadership who's in on this hunt that's really challenging. And then you have the rest of the team that for lack of better terms, doesn't even need to know what's happening on that side because it can just make things messy and muddy. Because I think startups are a fascinating, like, microeconomy. How did you make sure that the challenges from the raising capital, the growth, the expansion, and the nurturing of leadership never interfered with what the team was experiencing and never disrupted their process and their groundedness?
That's a good question. I think two things there. One, just because I run internal comms for the company with that team, we were always very transparent about where we are and the trajectory of the company. So I think, one, we always provided context as to why things were happening, and that really does like stop a lot of like worry. It's like, hey, we're going to the capital markets not because we're running out of money, it's because we have to do this much faster than what it currently allows. So this is very normal for companies to do. And so people are like, oh, I get it. I understand that now. So one, just getting ahead of the messaging. Like that's the biggest thing for me. It's like, what are people going to ask? What are they going to want to know? Get ahead of it. And then we've structured our leadership team so that there are folks that are kind of really looking inside the business, internally focused, and then folks are looking externally. So CEO and I kind of ran the raise. We ran the raise, our most recent one, which we got $14 million from, and we were able to kind of take our time to do that while the internal team focused on the pieces that move. I couldn't honestly tell you that it wasn't disruptive. I mean, I think for anyone who's listening to this who's going to raise around, no matter how structured or exceptional your team is, it's going to be disruptive. Like there's just going to be hours in a day where you're like spending all the time talking to potential investors and like maybe one catching up on emails, and you're like, there's no way for me to move the needle. So just know that, like, if you're thinking about raising money, understand it's a necessary evil, but there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it will be disruptive to the team. It will be. Yeah.
I remember the days of raising capital and trying to do both.
Yeah,
it's
hard.
It's kind of
nuts. It's
hard. Yeah, I also can appreciate that you mentioned, the conversations with investors and all the different pieces. Have you displaced from the team, but you're trying to get ahead of communications? Is that over communicating? Is that like the right amount of porridge and the right temperature? Like if someone is tuned in and they're like, do I over communicate? How do you know?
Yeah, it's more of an art than a science. It's understanding your team and understanding like their cadence for how to get information. It's something we refine every 3 to 6 months of like, are we doing too much? Are we doing too little? What are we hearing from the field? It's constant employee sentiment. Like, are you guys getting too many emails? Are you not? What are the things that we're putting in there? And we've also Axios is a newsletter, but they use a kind of a content framework called Smart Brevity that we've kind of adopted, which is like super helpful of like, how do you tell things and what are you supposed to tell and like at what cadence? And so there's actually some like best practices behind it. But for us, it's like our teams know that because of the leadership team and how we're structured and who we are, like we're never going to lie to you. Right. So we try to be as transparent as possible and meet people where they are on their communications journey. So we have, dedicated comms that go out. We have town halls. We have ongoing office hours on a specific topic. So if you want to spend an hour with any executive member about like whatever the thing may be. So I think we do internal comms probably better than anyone else. But we're also very, very comfortable with being transparent with our team about what's happening too.
So does that involve a lot of education? Because most employees, anytime capital raise and funding cycles and Series A's and on, that's like way off the normal rhetoric when it comes to being a part of it.
Yeah, becoming a venture-backed company, there's definitely been a lot of work that we've had to do in educating on like what that means, what the role of the investor and board are. Some of our folks have options in the company, so like educating them on like what that means and all that stuff. So yeah, a lot of our time has been spent learning and then re-educating, which is like really fun to be part of that team and get to be at the helm of that. But also I think it's really fun for our folks to be like, you guys get to be part of this company that's still growing, and you're one of the first 100, 200 employees and however big we get. So it's been an education, and our people are really I would say really curious, and they ask really intentional and thoughtful questions. And so we've never been put in a spot or in a situation where we aren't comfortable sharing based on the questions that they want. And we are also very clear that but there's just some things we can't tell you. And what's been beautiful is that we have the trust of the team and that the culture where they're like, I understand that. Like I know that if there was something that I needed to know around this, you would let us know in the way that you can. And so it's been great to build that trust to actually be the foundation of these comms.
How does a leader build trust?
I believe trust happens when you show over and over again that you're reliable and that you're transparent. So for us, it's having a bunch of wins where it's like, you guys, this has happened. We told you about it. You know that we're going to be on the up and up and about this. Leading with vulnerability is big on trust, and then also just I cannot stress this enough. Actually, building rapport with your teams, like just. I'm not saying that you have to be friends with your coworkers I hate that idea that, companies are families, but there has to be some camaraderie and rapport there. And once you build that and people get to know you and they understand your character and your, who you are as a person, that can only build the credibility for you and the things that you do.
I would say our avatar is often a business. So it's either an entrepreneur we work one-on-one with on vision and focus and influence, or we work with companies that are they're like $5 to $15 million revenue. They've got 8 or 9 employees, maybe 15 or 20, but they're still somewhat small. And in that, the boss is often like a best friend. Like it can get really dicey in the middle where there is a lot of good culture to the team, but also the boss is kind of in it a lot. Do you think that's dangerous? Do you think it needs to evolve? Because I also agree that if you slide too far into like business family thing, it can really damage the future of the org.
I think it depends on the size and scale, right? So when you're first starting, you're going to be around that proverbial coffee table. And it's like 5 or 6 people. So like it's probably going to be friends and family. So it is what it is, right? And I would imagine that founder would hopefully set some boundaries there. But then as you grow and scale, you build out a team around you that's not those folks, and they kind of natural boundaries kind of become apparent. But I do think if you're a founder, understanding that at some point you're going to have to remove yourself, and it sucks, right? Like you want to be, like, you remember when you knew everyone's name and like everything about their families, but then at some certain point, it just becomes not only just like inappropriate, but inefficient to try to do that. And so you have to kind of create these layers, and I've seen it happen from when we were a team of 7 to 200. Like you understand how bureaucracy happens and why a little bureaucracy needs to happen as you kind of grow and scale. And so I think it just naturally progresses unless like a founder or someone kind of pushes back against it. But at some point you just realize you don't have enough time to be in it. And so you got to get out of it.
Most of us entrepreneurs hated that.
Right.
And I recognize it's necessary. What's the compelling argument we can make to someone that's like, man, I quit the job so I didn't have to be in that, but now I've got to create that. Like, what's it do for them and what's it do for the team?
For them, it helps level them up, right? So you're not gonna grow and scale a company to 10x by doing that. It's just not possible. Like you're not going to be everyone's best friend. In fact, I would argue that you can't make the right decisions for the company if you are constantly thinking about that. Like that's just not. But if you want to be, a $1 million company with a couple of employees, handful of employees, then do whatever you want. I mean, that's what a family business is essentially. So I'd say the one thing is like, if you want to grow and scale, you're going to have to get out of it. And if you want to be seen as an impactful leader, there has to be kind of a natural kind of boundary there. And I'm not saying that you can't be close to your employees, but there has to be a boundary around like how you're articulating decisions, how you're talking to them, how you're communicating them. What's kind of inside the inside circle. So those are the big things. And then for the employees, I think it's so hard for employees, especially who are there for the beginning. They're always like, we have so much access to the CEO and executive team and we don't anymore, but giving them those breadcrumbs of growing and scaling and what's necessary. And like, if you do it right, they get it. Like, oh, they're busy doing XYZ things that are ultimately helping my employee experience, or they're doing XYZ things and making sure that this company is sustainable. I understand why. So like that, having that context actually kind of helps them too.
Yeah, that's so great. I've not heard it put that way. Yeah, that access changes quite a lot.
Quite a lot.
Yeah, really significant shift. when I think of your career track, like you've obviously been able to make a brand for yourself too. How do you encourage a team to have like their own personal brand and have their own thing inside of an organization that needs them to be kind of branded on the thing that they're doing?
Yeah, I talk a lot about this. I think personal professional brand is like so important to everyone's professional lives, and so I'm the biggest champion of that within our organization and any other organization. And if you do it right, you can make sure that like you wouldn't hire someone that's not values aligned to the organization. I would hope so. Their personal brand is actually probably going to be very aligned to the company's brand, right? So our folks are mental health advocates, folks that are really big in the community. Like that's just who the ethos of this company is, and so like they can build a brand through that. I think it would only not work if there's a huge misalignment in like the company's values and ideals versus the individuals.
That makes sense. And also is way oversimplifying the reality.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's important with our team to make sure that people have their own brand and kind of have space to be them. And also that, yeah, there's value alignment that keeps us from steering too far wide. Let's go this way as we kind of run towards closing. What does it mean to get out of your own way? Like, what does that phrase mean to you?
Ooh, get out of your own way. I think it's understanding what got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. And so for me, it was like understanding that I need to like let go of control, like understanding what I can control or what I can't. Within the last couple of years, it's going to sound counterintuitive, counterproductive, like not caring as much. Like there'd be so many times I would just be like festering about a decision that was made that actually didn't matter. Right. And I would make decisions based on that would like were hindering me in my movement forward. And then once I was like, did that impact me or anything that's going to happen in my day to day? Was it ultimately a fine decision? Yeah. Then like, who cares? And so once I got there, it's like, okay, that's great. But yeah, getting out of your own way is just like understanding who you are and what's going to get you to the next level, and being okay with like letting go of the processes, the people, the habits, the stuff. That's kind of hard, but like once you're able to do that, then I think you're going to open up to some curiosity that'll let you really level up and progress in a really cool way.
Sounds like you've been through a couple of those iterations.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, I think going back to the original conversation, I'm so privileged to have the therapy journey and the counseling journey and the coaching journey I've had. So these conversations are just like top. I think about this stuff all the time and every day. Like I'm constantly assessing was like, why am I making this decision? Why am I so triggered by this? Could I be doing something differently? Like that's always in my mind. And so, and it's something that's going to continue to be top of mind for me too.
So last question, but I think what you just said is bigger than you might know. To do that, you have to have a space between the input, whatever you get said, whatever gets emailed, whatever action happens, and your reaction. You have to have enough of a space to kind of wedge it open and say like, whoa, wait a minute, before the natural response or the reactive response comes out, I'm gonna temper this. How did you learn that?
Still learning it. But I think it's really understanding your triggers, right? And understanding why you're heightened, because then you naturally are like, wait, is that email because of me, or is it because is it because of that, or is it because of my own shit? And then you're like, oh, it's my stuff. Then like, I can't even like think about it. So you just, you take your walk, you take your drive, you talk to a friend, you do whatever. I think the best thing was like understanding why I get heightened by certain things. And once I knew that, it's like, no, this is Sentari shit. Like they're actually in the right. I got to take a step back and be like, why is it still bothering me? And like, that's been the biggest thing.
Nice. The pause.
Yeah. The pause.
Man,
yeah.
The pause is hard. The pause is hard.
It's hard. And I think it's a work in progress. Like I'm not 100% at it, and I don't think I'll ever be, because I'm very much a person that likes like I react. And most of the time, like it's a reaction in a good way that gets a decision made really quickly and the right decision. But sometimes it's not gone that well. And like, that's still my ongoing coaching and counseling too.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. I wouldn't say emotional. I'd say I'm dynamic and energetic, and that can sometimes come off on the wrong side of the spectrum before I've had a chance to like, okay, woosah. But I can appreciate that you've also got a dynamic range, and That's what makes you really good at leading.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about you? Maybe follow your column, and just pay attention to what you got going on.
I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. So I would say LinkedIn, type in Sentari Minor, find me. I have a lot of my content there. And then there's SentariMinor.com that kind of has a lot of my blogs and everything there too. So if you Google me, I'm pretty easy to find. Reach out to me via LinkedIn. Happy to grab coffee or a virtual call with anyone.
Sentari is doing some really cool things, and it's one thing to spend time on a podcast with him, but your presence is also really
thanks, man.
invigorating. So I have really appreciated this conversation, namely the tethering between how you started in creative writing and then are now essentially creating influence through communication and leadership.
Love that.
Just such a cool arc. And how much it's clear that you work on yourself, but you also work on uplifting a team. Like it's awesome.
My favorite things to do. That's
right. If you learn to get paid doing what you love, you never work a day.
That's so true.
Or you overwork all the time. All right. Well, Sentari, thank you so much for being here. I would encourage you to reach out and connect with him, or at least follow along what he writes, because it's really good writing. And pay attention to more of these. We're going to dig into things like culture and business and integration and all that as we go. If you have a need for what EvolvedMD does, reach out and schedule a call. I'm sure they can help you get set up inside of your business.
It's awesome, man. Thanks for having me.